The crystal water glass exploded against the wall behind my head. I felt a shard nick my left ear, warm blood trickling down to stain the collar of the only good shirt I owned anymore. "You senile old fool," my son hissed, leaning across the dinner table at L'Aubergine, the most pretentious restaurant in downtown Chicago. "Stop embarrassing this family with your pathetic gestures." The entire dining room went quiet. 40 people. Crystal forks frozen midair. A pianist who stopped playing Chopin in the middle of a phrase. Even the waiters became statues, holding silver trays of overpriced lobster. I looked down at the table. There, sitting next to a half-eaten plate of foie gras my daughter-in-law had ordered and barely touched, was the small wooden box I had brought. Inside was a pocket watch. A 927 Hamilton, gold-plated, the same model my own father had carried through the Korean War. I had spent 6 months tracking one down. I had paid $1,800 for it from a collector in Springfield. I had the inscription engraved myself, "To my grandson on his 16th birthday. Time is the only inheritance that matters." Grandpa, my son, had opened the box, looked at it for maybe 2 seconds, and laughed. Not a real laugh. The kind of laugh you do when you want everyone to know you find something beneath you. "A used watch," he announced to the table. Loud enough for the hedge fund managers and surgeons' wives to hear. Dad bought my son a used watch, probably from a pawn shop. He held it up like it was roadkill. "Marshall, sweetheart, I'm sorry. Grandpa doesn't understand that you don't give a 16-year-old garbage." My grandson, sitting 2 seats down from me, didn't say a word. He just stared at his plate. He was a good kid, quiet, sensitive. The kind of kid who reads books his parents would call weird. I saw his hand twitch toward the watch, then pull back like he'd been burned. He knew better. He had been trained. That's when my son threw the glass. My daughter-in-law leaned toward the woman next to her, a plastic surgeon's wife named something French I could never pronounce, and said in a voice meant to carry, "We've been begging him to see a doctor. He has good days and bad days. Mostly bad. We took him in out of charity, you know. He was living in his car. That was a lie. I had been living in a perfectly fine 2-bedroom in Evanston until they convinced me, for tax purposes, they said, for family, they said, to sell it and move into the basement apartment of their 12,000 square foot monstrosity in Lake Forest. That was 4 years ago. The proceeds from my house had gone into the family trust, which I now understood meant my son's pool renovation and my daughter-in-law's 3rd trip to St. Tropez. I picked up my linen napkin. I dabbed the blood off my ear. I stood up slowly. My knees were not what they used to be. "I'm going to step outside," I said. "Sit down," my son snapped. "We haven't even had dessert. You're going to make a scene." I looked at him. Really looked at him. I tried to find the 7-year-old who used to climb into my lap and ask me to read Where the Wild Things Are one more time. He was in there somewhere, maybe, buried under a custom-tailored suit, and 20 years of being told no was a 4-letter word. "I'm not making a scene, son," I said. "I'm leaving one." I walked past the maitre d', who avoided my eyes. I walked past the valet, who held out his hand for a tip I no longer had the cash to give. I walked out into the November cold without a coat, because my coat was at the house, which wasn't my house, which had never been my house. I walked the 4 miles back to Lake Forest. I'm 68 years old, and my hip was screaming by mile 2, but I kept walking. Cars passed. Nobody stopped. I had time to think, which was something I hadn't really had in 4 years. When I got back to the estate, the gate code didn't work. I stood there in the dark. In front of the iron gates I had never been allowed to call mine, and I pressed the buzzer. Nothing. I pressed it again. The intercom crackled. "Sir, you'll need to take the service entrance," came the voice of the night security guard. A new one. I didn't recognize the voice. "This is the homeowner's father," I said. "I live here." "I have instructions, sir. Service entrance only." Mr. Halloran called ahead. So that was his plan. Lock me out at the front. Make me walk around to the back like a delivery boy. Show me my place one more time before bed. I walked around. The service gate was open. I went down the long driveway, past the 4-car garage that held his Range Rover, her Bentley, his weekend Porsche, and the spot where my old Buick had been until they sold it last spring because it lowered property values. I walked around to the side door that led directly to the basement, where I had a converted apartment with a bathroom you couldn't stand up in and a window that looked out at the foundation drain. But I didn't go to my room. I walked into the boiler room. Behind the water heater, taped to a copper pipe in a place no one ever looked, was a small, fireproof key safe. I had put it there in my second week in this house, before the arrogance had time to fully calcify. Inside the safe was a thumb drive, a burner phone still in its plastic, and a key to a storage unit in Waukegan that had been paid up for 10 years in advance. I pocketed all 3, then I went to my room, and sat on the edge of the twin bed they'd given me. Twin, in case you missed that. A twin bed for a grown man. And I made a phone call. The man on the other end picked up on the first ring. He always did. "It's me," I said. A long pause, then a sigh. "I was wondering when you were going to call." His name was Bartholomew, but everyone called him Bart. He had been my attorney for 41 years. He had drafted my first contract. He had been the best man at my second wedding. He had buried my second wife with me when the cancer took her in 2019. He had warned me, he had begged me, not to sign over operational control of Halloran Kestrel Logistics to my son 5 years ago. I had signed anyway, because what else does a father do when his son comes to him crying, saying he's ready, saying he wants to make me proud? Tonight he threw a glass at my head, I said, in a public restaurant, in front of my grandson. Jesus Christ, he locked me out of the front gate. I had to walk home in the cold. Jesus Christ, Bart, I want to pull the trigger. The pause this time was longer. He was, I knew, sitting in his study, a study I had been in maybe 200 times, with his bourbon and his Labrador and his wife asleep upstairs. "Are you certain?" he asked. "Once we do this, there's no walking it back. He will lose everything in a single morning, including the house, including her cars, including the country club membership. I know what he loses. And the boy?" That was the question that mattered. The boy, my grandson. Marshall, the kid who had stared at his plate tonight because he had learned that the only way to survive in that family was to make yourself invisible. "The boy comes with me," I said. "I want him out before sunrise. Whatever it takes, I have someone who can help with that. Quietly, legally. Then let's begin." I gave him the list I had been preparing in my head for nearly 2 years. A list I had hoped, prayed, would never be needed. Freeze the operating accounts of Halloran Kestrel by 7 Halloran Kestrel by 7 Halloran Kestrel. By 7 signing authority on the corporate cards. Liquidate the trust holdings into the offshore vehicle in Bermuda. 23 million in liquid, plus whatever could be moved from securities by end of day. Initiate the eviction protocol. The Lake Forest Estate, the Aspen Condo, the Tampa Boat Slip, all titled under Halloran Holdings LLC, of which I was the sole and unrevoked managing member. And one more thing. The thing he had never even thought to look for. Bart. The cell phones. The car GPS. The GAR GPS. The GAR GPS, the Tesla wall charger. Every account he runs to that house is paid by Halloran Holdings. He never moved them to a personal account. He was too lazy. Pull them too? Pull everything that has my name as the original pair. Let him wake up tomorrow and try to start his Porsche. Consider it done. I hung up. I stared at the wall. I felt nothing. I'd expected to feel something, guilt, maybe, or sadness, or that strange relief you read about in books. But there was nothing. Just a kind of quiet. I packed. It took less than 10 minutes because I owned almost nothing. 3 shirts, 2 pairs of slacks, the windbreaker, my reading glasses, the small framed photo of my second wife from our trip to Banff, and my father's pocket knife. I put it all in a duffel bag I'd gotten from a hardware store promotion in 2003. Then I went upstairs. It was almost midnight. The house was dark, except for the kitchen, where my daughter-in-law was on her phone, glass of white wine in hand, scrolling through what looked like a real estate listing in Tuscany. She didn't see me. I went past her, down the long hallway, up the back stairs to the second floor. My grandson's room was the third on the left. I knocked very softly. I heard him stir. He opened the door in his pajamas, his eyes red. He had been crying. "Marshall," I said, "Grandpa's leaving. I want you to come with me." He looked at me for a long moment. Then he asked the only question that mattered. "Will Dad let me?" "Your dad doesn't have a say in this anymore. But you do. You don't have to come. If you want to stay, I'll understand. But if you want to go, you have 10 minutes to put what matters in a bag." He didn't take 10 minutes. He took 4. He came out of his room with a backpack, his laptop, a stuffed bear so threadbare I recognized it from when he was 3, and the wooden box with the pocket watch. He had pulled it out of the trash can outside L'Aubergine. He had walked back for it after his father had stormed off. He had walked back for it. I almost broke right there in the hallway. I didn't, but I almost did. "Where are we going, Grandpa?" he whispered. "Somewhere your dad can't follow," I said. We went down the back stairs. We went out the same service door I had come in. There, idling at the end of the driveway with its lights off, was a black Suburban driven by a man Bart had sent. I didn't ask his name. He didn't ask mine. He drove us to a private airfield outside Kenosha, where a small plane I had owned for 22 years through a leasing entity my son didn't know about was waiting on the runway. By 4 a.m., we were in the air over Lake Michigan, headed east. By 7 a.m., my son's world was ending. I was eating a bowl of oatmeal at a diner in Erie, Pennsylvania, when Bart called with a report. It started, he told me, with the Tesla. My son woke up at 6:15, his usual time, and went out to the garage to drive to his Pilates class. The Tesla was dead. Not low battery. Dead. Disconnected from the network. The wall charger had been remotely disabled at 6:02 a.m. He tried the Range Rover. The Range Rover started, but the GPS and the cellular connection were dead because they ran through a corporate Verizon account that had been canceled at 6204. He didn't know where his Pilates studio was without GPS. He had been going there twice a week for 3 years. He went back inside, irritated. He asked the housekeeper to bring him an espresso, the espresso machine, a $14,000 Italian thing he'd bragged about to anyone who would listen. Wouldn't start, because it was on the smart home circuit that ran through the corporate account. The whole smart home system was offline. The lights worked, the fridge worked, but every smart thing he had paid extra to have, the music system, the climate control, the sub-zero wine fridge, the heated floors, was dead. He picked up his iPhone, or tried to. It was bricked. Activation locked, because the corporate account that owned the line had requested a remote wipe at 6:08 a.m. He yelled for my daughter-in-law. She came down. She tried her phone. Same story. She tried her iPad. Same story. She tried her iPad. Same story. She tried her American Express. Declined. She tried her Visa. Declined. She tried her Visa. She tried her debit card. Declined. By 6:45, my son was in his bathrobe in the kitchen, screaming at a dead phone, demanding to talk to whoever the hell was doing this. The housekeeper, a woman named Ines, who had worked there for 9 years and had been cordial to me when no one was watching, quietly told him she had received a wire deposit at 6 a.m., 3 months of severance, paid by Halloran Holdings, along with a notice that her employment had been transferred to a new household effective immediately. The new household was mine. She told him this with a small, careful smile. At 7:01 a.m., a Blacktown car pulled up to the front gate. Out stepped a process server, a sheriff's deputy, and a representative from Halloran Holdings, which is to say a paralegal from Bart's firm. They pressed the buzzer. My son, half-dressed, half out of his mind, came running down to the gate. The paralegal handed him a thick manila envelope. Inside were 3 documents. The first was a notice of eviction. He had 72 hours to vacate the premises at 1847 North Ridge Lane, Lake Forest. The property was owned outright by Halloran Holdings, LLC. He had no lease, no mortgage, no claim of tenancy. He was, legally, a guest, and the host had asked him to leave. The second was a notice of termination from Halloran Kestra Logistics, effective midnight. For cause. The cause was a forensic audit Bart had been quietly running for 14 months that had documented just over $4.1 million in personal expenses my son had been routing through the company. Country club dues. His wife's plastic surgeon. A diamond bracelet for someone who is not his wife. The audit was a thing of beauty. It even had a tab for tips at strip clubs. His name was on every receipt. The third was a letter from me. Just 1 paragraph. I dictated it to Bart from the airfield. Son. Tonight I gave my grandson a watch that belonged to your great-grandfather. You called it garbage. You threw a glass at me. You locked me out of the gate. I have decided that you are correct. The watch was garbage in your hands. So I am taking back everything else of mine that is currently in your hands. I think you'll find the list is long. Dad. He didn't take it well. The first thing he did, Bart told me, was to call his wife's parents in Boca Raton. He told them to wire him $40,000 to a Western Union by noon. They told him they would think about it. They never called him back. They never sent the money. I learned later that her father had thought my son was a phony for 12 years, and was thrilled to finally have proof. The second thing he did was call his lawyer. His lawyer's name was Trevor, and Trevor had been on retainer for 6 years through a corporate account that, you guessed it, had been frozen at 6,004 a.m. Trevor took the call, but informed my son that without a clear path to payment, he could only offer 20 minutes of preliminary advice. The advice was, this is not survivable. Your father is the grantor of an irrevocable trust that you mistakenly believed was revocable. He has retained every right. You signed paperwork 5 years ago that you did not fully read. You have no standing. My son hung up on Trevor and threw the phone across the kitchen. The phone was already dead, so it didn't matter much. The third thing he did, and this is the part I had been waiting for, because I knew my son better than my son knew himself, was call the Lake County Sheriff's Office and report his teenage son as a missing person. Abducted, he said, by his mentally deteriorating father. He demanded an Amber Alert. Bart had, of course, anticipated this. The Lake County Sheriff's Office was already in possession of 3 documents Bart had filed at 500 a.m. The first was a notarized affidavit signed by my grandson at 3:47 a.m. in the back of the Suburban, witnessed by a notary Bart had sent along, stating that Marshall Halloran, age 16, was traveling voluntarily with his paternal grandfather. The second was a recording, recovered from a nanny cam that had been in the kitchen of the Lake Forest house for 2 years, of my daughter-in-law slapping my grandson hard enough to leave a mark and telling him he was a useless little shit who had ruined her body when she carried him. The recording's 8 months old. I had it because Bart had it. We had been quietly building this file for a long time. The third document was a petition for emergency protective custody, filed in Cook County Family Court at 6 time. By an attorney specializing in adolescent welfare and granted by a judge at 7:30 a.m. on the strength of the recording alone. When the deputy showed up at my son's house at 8:15 to take his missing person report, they instead handed him a court order forbidding him from contacting his son without a supervised visitation arrangement, pending a custody hearing in 3 weeks. That, Bart told me, was when my son broke a window with his bare fist. 2 of his fingers, the deputy's report later noted, appeared to be fractured. They offered to call him an ambulance. He told them where they could put their ambulance. They left him bleeding on his own front lawn. We landed in Bar Harbor, Maine, at 9:45 a.m. I have a house in Maine, not a big one. A clapboard place on the water, 3 bedrooms, a wraparound porch, a dock that needs replacing every 6 years. I bought it in 1991 with the second check I ever cashed from Halloran Kestrel. I never told my son it existed. I never put his name on any of the paperwork. There's a fishing boat in the boathouse. There's a wood stove. There's a shelf of paperbacks I have been meaning to read for 30 years. My grandson hadn't slept on the plane. He was wired and exhausted at the same time, that strange chemical state teenagers go into. When we walked into the house, he stood in the middle of the living room and just looked. "Grandpa," he said, "whose house is this?" "It's mine," I said. "And it's been waiting for you." "How long?" "Since before you were born." He sat down on the couch, a couch I had bought in 1994, a couch I had not sat on in 9 years, and he started crying. Not the kind of crying you do because you're sad. The kind of crying you do when you've been holding something in for a very long time and you finally find a place safe enough to let go. I sat down next to him. I didn't put my arm around him. He wasn't a little kid anymore, and I wasn't going to force it. I just sat there. After about 20 minutes, he leaned over and put his head on my shoulder, which was something he had not done since he was 9. "Is Mom going to come find me?" he asked. "No," I said. "Your mother is going to be very busy for a while." "Is Dad? Your father's going to try? Will you let him?" I thought about that for a long time before I answered. "I'll let him try," I said, "but he won't succeed." 3 weeks. That's how long it took for it all to come apart. In the first week, my son and his wife moved into a Residence Inn off Route 41. They paid for it with the last of her parents' patience. Boca finally sent a few $1,000s, with a note that this was the absolute last time. He spent 5 days calling everyone he had ever done business with, looking for a loan. Most of them didn't take the call. The ones who did informed him, gently or not. That word had spread. A Halloran without the Halloran Kestrel signing authority was not a Halloran worth lending to. In the second week, his wife filed for divorce. This surprised exactly no one except him. The filing came with a request for an emergency support order, which her lawyer, a shark named Margolis, whom I had known for 20 years, and who, by total coincidence, owed me a favor, fumbled in a way that ensured no support would actually be paid until the assets were settled, which would take years. The filing also came with a sworn statement from her detailing emotional abuse, financial control, and an extramarital affair with a personal trainer named Brock. The filing was in the Tribune's online edition by Wednesday. In the third week, the criminal indictment came down. I hadn't asked Bart to push for criminal charges. I had asked him to make sure they were available if needed. The decision belonged to the Cook County State's attorney, who, after reviewing the forensic audit and the 8-month-old kitchen recording and the broken window incident report and the testimony of 2 former assistants my son had verbally abused for years, decided that needed had arrived: wire fraud, embezzlement, domestic battery in the 3rd degree. The arraignment was on a Tuesday. He posted bail with money he had to borrow against his wife's grandmother's pearls. The pearls were not actually his to borrow against. That became its own problem later. The custody hearing was on a Thursday. I drove down to Chicago alone. My grandson didn't want to come, and I didn't want to make him. He stayed in Maine with a woman Bart had hired, a retired social worker named Mary Ellen, who was patient and made very good blueberry pancakes. The courtroom was small. A family court judge named Lynette presided. She was in her 50s, gray-streaked hair, no nonsense. My son was there. He had lost weight. His suit didn't fit anymore, and not in the good way. His wife was not there. She was in Florida pretending to be a victim. His lawyer was someone I had never heard of, court appointed, because Trevor had stopped returning his calls. The judge asked my grandson if he would like to address the court via the previously recorded statement we had submitted. He had recorded it 3 days earlier in the living room of the main house, Mary Ellen behind the camera. The clerk played the video. In it, my grandson talked for 11 minutes. He talked about being told from age 6 that he was a disappointment. He talked about being made to wait in the car while his parents went to dinner because he had embarrassed his mother by having a stutter. He talked about his father telling him, on his 13th birthday, that his only value was as the future face of Halloran Kestrel, and he had better not screw that up. He talked about being slapped. He talked about being told he was unwanted. He talked about a man who used to take him fishing on a lake somewhere he could not remember, and how that man had stopped coming around because his parents had told him the man was sick in the head, and how he had believed them until that man showed up at L'Aubergine 3 weeks ago with a pocket watch and a steady voice, and, for the first time in a decade, treated him like he was a person. When the video ended, the judge was quiet for a long moment. Then she awarded full custody to me, provisional for 90 days, permanent thereafter, pending behavioral review. My son stood up and tried to say something. The bailiff put a hand on his shoulder. He sat back down. He looked at me from across the courtroom. He looked, for the first time in years, like the 7-year-old who used to climb into my lap. I almost said something. I almost forgave him, right there in that courtroom. Because that's what fathers do, isn't it? Forgive the unforgivable, because the alternative is to admit you raised something you can't fix. But I thought about my grandson. I thought about the bruise the recording had shown. I thought about the watch in the trash can outside L'Aubergine, and the boy who had walked back for it. I didn't say anything. I stood up. I walked out. Bart was waiting for me in the hallway. "You okay?" he asked. "No," I said. "Yeah," he said. "Me neither. It's been almost a year. My grandson is 17 now. He is finishing his junior year at a small private school in Bar Harbor where they don't care about his last name. He has a girlfriend, a thoughtful kid named Oifis, whose father is a lobster man. He stutters less. He laughs more. He writes. Actual writing, not text messages, real essays and stories. And last month he showed me one he had submitted to a state contest. It came in second. He framed the certificate and hung it in his room, which is the room I used to sleep in when I came up here alone. Before he existed, before any of this existed. He wears the pocket watch every day. He winds it in the morning. He's careful with it. My son did not go to prison. He pleaded down to probation and a fine. The fine he could not pay. He is currently living in a 1-bedroom apartment in Glenview, working as a mid-level account manager for a logistics company that is not Halloran Kestrel. His ex-wife married Brock. They live in Naples, Florida. I am told, by people I do not ask, that she is unhappy. I find I do not care. My son has written me 4 letters. The first was angry. I burned it in the fireplace. The second was self-pitying. I burned it too. The third was an apology that wasn't really an apology, the kind where every sentence starts with, "I'm sorry that you," instead of, "I'm sorry that I." I read it twice. I put it in a drawer. The fourth came 2 weeks ago. It was 3 pages. It was handwritten. It said, among other things, that he had started seeing a therapist. Court mandated, he admitted, but he was going beyond what was required. It said he understood that he might never be allowed back into his son's life, and that he was going to live the rest of his life trying to deserve the chance, even if the chance never came. It said that he had been thinking, lately, about a fishing trip we took when he was 8 years old, when I had taught him how to bait a hook, and he had been afraid of the worm, and I had been patient with him, and he was sorry, more sorry than he had words for, that he had not been patient with his own son. I read that letter 4 times. I did not burn it. I have not written back yet. I do not know if I will. My grandson has not been told it arrived, and I have not decided whether to tell him. He turns 18 in 7 months. After that, the decision will be his, not mine. I sit on the porch most evenings watching the bay. The water turns gold for about 20 minutes around sunset, and then it goes dark very quickly. My grandson comes out and sits with me, sometimes with a book, sometimes with his guitar, sometimes just to sit. Last week he said, without looking at me, "Grandpa, why didn't you do this years ago?" I thought about it for a while. "Because I was hoping he'd find his way back on his own," I said. "And because I didn't have you with me yet. I couldn't leave without you, and you weren't ready to leave." He nodded. I'm glad you waited, he said. Me too, kid. We sat there until the gold was gone. If you've ever loved someone who treated you like a burden, a parent, a child, a spouse, anyone, and you've spent years telling yourself they'll come around, that the love you remember is still in there somewhere, that family is family, and you don't walk away from family. I want you to hear something. From a 68-year-old man who waited too long, sometimes the love you remember is gone. Sometimes the person you raised has become someone you wouldn't have let into your house if they'd shown up as a stranger. And sometimes the bravest, most loving thing you can do, for yourself and for the people in that house who are still worth saving, is to walk out the front gate, in the cold, without a coat, and never come back. If this story meant something to you, hit the like button and tell me in the comments, have you ever had to walk away from someone you raised? I read every one. And I'm here, on this porch, listening. I think about that night of Lubergine almost every evening when the bay turns gold and my grandson Marshall comes out to sit beside me on the porch. I think about the man I used to be, the one who walked 4 miles home in the cold because his son had taken his car keys, the one who slept in a basement with a window that looked out at a foundation drain, the one who told himself, year after year, that patience was the same thing as love. It wasn't. I learned that the hard way. Patience without limits isn't love. It's a slow surrender of yourself to someone who has stopped seeing you as a person. My son didn't become cruel overnight. He became cruel because every time he tested a line and I let him cross it, he learned that the line wasn't real. I taught him that. Not on purpose. But I taught him. Here's what I understand now. Sitting on this porch at 68 years old, with a watch on my grandson's wrist and a divorce decree on my son's record. Every choice has a tail. Every kindness extended to someone who exploits it builds a debt that someone else, somewhere, is going to be forced to pay. In my case, the someone else was Marshall. The boy paid for my cowardice with bruises and a stutter in a belief, at 16 years old, that he was unwanted. I will spend whatever years I have left trying to balance that ledger. I don't know if I can. What I know is this. Character is not something you inherit. It's something you build, day by day, by what you tolerate and what you refuse. My son inherited my last name and my company and my house, and none of those things made him into a man. What would have made him into a man was being told no when he needed to hear it, and I never said it. I thought I was being a good father. I was being a frightened one. I want to leave you with 3 things, because 3 is what I can hold in my head at this age. The first is that decency is not weakness. You can be kind without being a doormat. You can love someone and still close the door on their behavior. The second is that wisdom is mostly the discipline to see what is actually happening, instead of the story you wish were happening. I wasted 4 years in that basement because I kept rewriting the story in my head. Don't do that. Look at what is in front of you. Believe it. The third is grit. The kind that lets you walk into the cold without a coat because the warm place behind you has stopped being a home. You will need it. Everyone does eventually. Marshall is going to be okay. I am going to be okay. My son might be okay someday too, but that is no longer my project. My project, for whatever time I have left, is the boy on this porch and the small good things I can still do. That's enough. It turns out it was always enough.